It's early morning, and Arthur lies in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Another birthday. He doesn't say it out loud, but the thought lingers. Slowly, he pulls himself out of bed, moving through his house like he's carrying the weight of all the years he's lived. The house feels more like a museum than a home, old photos on the walls, his wife's favorite vase sitting undisturbed, birthday cards from years ago tucked neatly on a shelf, sent by children who now seem like strangers. He picks up one of the cards, flips it open, and smiles faintly, but there's no real joy in it. As the morning unfolds, Arthur falls into the rhythm of his routine. The house is silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He gets dressed in the same clothes he wears most days, a worn-out sweater, slacks that have seen better days. He heads out, bracing himself against the cold drizzle that has blanketed the streets. The weather mirrors his mood, gray, heavy, lonely. At the diner, it's the same story. The waitress knows him by name, but there's no warmth in the exchange, just the obligatory pleasantries of someone who's been serving him for years. His lunch is simple, tasteless. He barely notices what he's eating. The other diners are groups of friends or families, chattering, laughing. Their happiness feels distant to him, like something from a life he once knew but is now far removed from. No one acknowledges his birthday. He doesn't expect them to. Groceries next. A small list, just enough to prepare dinner for one. He moves slowly down the aisles, scanning the shelves without much interest. The rain picks up as he walks back home, the cold seeping into his bones. Once inside, he doesn't bother to take off his coat right away. The house is no warmer than the world outside. Dinner is simple. A bowl of soup, some bread. The table, large enough for a family, feels absurd with just one plate in the middle. Arthur sits there, spoon halfway to his mouth, staring into space. Memories of birthdays long gone flicker through his mind, his wife laughing, his children excitedly bringing him gifts. The silence now is suffocating. He pushes his plate away, appetite gone. The clock ticks loudly in the quiet room, marking the end of another birthday he'd rather forget. A sudden knock at the door snaps him out of his thoughts. Arthur hesitates. No one ever knocks on his door. He's not expecting anyone. He pulls himself out of the chair, shuffling slowly toward the sound. When he opens the door, the last thing he expects to see is a little girl, standing there with a bright smile, holding a balloon in one hand and a handmade card in the other. "Hi," she chirps. "I saw you sitting alone and I wanted to wish you a happy birthday." Arthur blinks, momentarily stunned. He glances behind her, half expecting to see someone else, a parent, perhaps, but there's no one. It's just her, a young girl with wide, curious eyes and a disarming sense of boldness. He's confused but doesn't know how to react. It's been so long since anyone wished him a happy birthday. She thrusts the card toward him. "I made this for you," she says proudly. Arthur looks down at the card, a colorful, hand-drawn picture of a birthday cake with candles. The balloon bobs slightly in the wind, its bright color a stark contrast to the dull gray of the sky behind her. Her innocence and warmth cut through the cold in a way Arthur hadn't expected. He doesn't know what to say. "Thank you," he finally manages, voice gruff with age and surprise. "I saw you sitting all by yourself," she continues, her voice chipper. "And no one should be alone on their birthday." Arthur is still processing. He hasn't had company in so long that the idea of someone, especially a child, standing on his doorstep just to wish him well seems almost surreal. But there she is, standing expectantly, waiting for him to invite her in. For a moment, he's unsure. He looks at her again, this time really seeing her. Bright clothes, a little too big for her, mismatched shoes, but a warmth that draws him in. After a beat, he steps aside. "Would you like to come in?" The smile on her face widens, and she eagerly steps into the house. Arthur gestures toward the living room, still unsure of how to handle the situation. So he skips in, her balloon bobbing in the air as she settles into one of the large armchairs. The house feels too big for the two of them, and the silence that follows is awkward. Arthur sits down across from her, his hands resting awkwardly on his knees, glancing between her and the floor. Zoe looks around the room, taking everything in with bright, curious eyes, not at all bothered by the quiet. After a few moments, she breaks the silence with a question that catches Arthur off guard. "Why were you sitting by yourself on your birthday?" She's not accusatory, just curious, and her innocence makes the question feel less intrusive than it should. Arthur hesitates, not used to being questioned like this. "It's just the way it is now," he says after a beat, his voice gruff but not unkind. "My wife, well, she passed a long time ago. And my kids, they live far away." Zoe tilts her head, thinking. "Did you always celebrate with them before?" Arthur's lips curl into a faint smile, and despite himself, he starts talking. "Yeah, when they were younger. Birthdays were a big deal in our house. My wife, she loved to make a fuss." He chuckles softly at the memory, the weight in his chest lifting just a little. Zoe, sensing the opening, leans forward, clearly interested. "What kind of things did you do?" Arthur's initial hesitation begins to melt away. "Oh, we'd have big dinners, cakes, all the kids running around. The house used to feel full." He pauses, his mind drifting back to those days. "But now, well, it's just me." Zoe listens, hanging on every word. "That sounds fun," she says, her voice gentle. "I never had a birthday like that." The statement hangs in the air, surprising Arthur. "Never?" he asks, eyebrows knitting in concern. Zoe shrugs, trying to sound casual, but there's a hint of sadness in her voice. "Not really. I'm in foster care, and birthdays are just another day, I guess." She doesn't elaborate, and Arthur doesn't press, but her words linger. The two sit there for a moment, sharing the silence. There's a newfound understanding between them now, two people who've experienced different kinds of loneliness. Zoe, eager to change the mood, suddenly brightens. "Hey! Why don't we bake a cake? It's still your birthday, right?" Arthur blinks, caught off guard by the suggestion. "Bake a cake?" He chuckles, almost in disbelief. "I haven't baked anything in years." But Zoe's enthusiasm is contagious, and without waiting for his full approval, she's already hopping up from her seat, heading toward the kitchen. "I bet we can make something great!" she calls out over her shoulder, not giving him a chance to back out. Arthur follows her, bemused but strangely energized by her excitement. The kitchen, like the rest of the house, hasn't seen much activity in a long time. Zoe pulls open cabinets, rummaging for ingredients. Arthur watches, shaking his head slightly, but there's a lightness in his heart he hasn't felt in ages. Together they sift through the cupboards, finding old bags of flour and sugar, a slightly outdated bottle of vanilla extract. Zoe directs the process with the confidence of someone much older, and Arthur can't help but smile as she bosses him around. "Stir it like this," she says, demonstrating with exaggerated movements. Arthur follows her lead, chuckling under his breath at her seriousness. The kitchen begins to fill with the warm smell of cake batter, a smell Arthur hasn't experienced in years. Zoe chatters the whole time, talking about her favorite desserts, her dream birthday cake, and Arthur listens, chiming in now and then. It's been so long since his house was filled with this kind of energy, and he finds himself enjoying it more than he expected. As the cake bakes, the two of them clean up, laughing when Zoe accidentally spills flour everywhere. Arthur can't remember the last time he laughed like this. By the time the cake is out of the oven and cooling on the counter, the whole house feels different, lighter. They sit at the kitchen table, the cake between them. Zoe grabs a fork and digs in without waiting for it to cool properly, making Arthur chuckle again. He follows her lead, taking a bite. It's not the best cake he's ever had, but in that moment, it might as well be. "This was fun," Zoe says through a mouthful of cake, her eyes sparkling. "You know, I think this is the best birthday I've ever been to." Arthur looks at her, surprised by the comment. She's serious, and the weight of her words settles in. It's a simple statement, but it means something more. This is more than just a fun evening for her. "I'm glad you came," Arthur says softly. He means it. Zoe beams at him, then pauses, her expression turning thoughtful. "Do you think maybe we could do this again next year?" Her voice is hesitant, like she's unsure if she should ask. Arthur feels a lump in his throat. He looks at her, this small, bright child who somehow stumbled into his life, and who, in just a few short hours, has brought warmth back into his home. "You're always welcome here," he says, his voice soft but steady. Zoe's face lights up, and for the first time in years, Arthur feels like he's not alone anymore. The morning sun filters through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the living room where Arthur sits, sipping his morning coffee. The warmth of the previous night lingers in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Arthur feels something close to contentment. He glances toward the small, handmade birthday card Zoe left behind, smiling faintly. It's been years since his home felt so alive, so full of joy. Just as he begins to settle into his routine, there's a loud, urgent knock at the door. Arthur's peaceful moment shatters instantly, his heart skipping a beat. He isn't expecting anyone. The knock comes again, more insistent this time. Confused, he sets down his cup and rises slowly, making his way to the door. When he opens it, 2 police officers stand there, their expressions serious. The sight of their uniforms immediately puts Arthur on edge. His first thought is that something's wrong, very wrong. "Good morning, sir," the taller of the 2 officers says, his tone curt but not unkind. "We're looking for a young girl. Her name's Zoe. Was she with you last night?" Arthur blinks, caught completely off guard. "Zoe? Yes, she was here, but—" he hesitates, unsure how much to explain. "She had dinner with me, but she left after." "Why? What's going on?" The officers exchange a glance before the taller one speaks again. "Sir, her foster family reported her missing. We've been searching for her since last night." Arthur feels a cold pit form in his stomach. Missing? He had no idea. She seemed so carefree, so at ease when she was with him. "She didn't say anything about being missing," he says slowly, struggling to process the situation. "She just wanted to wish me a happy birthday." The second officer, a woman, steps forward. "Mr. Reynolds, may we come inside? We need to ask you some questions about your interaction with Zoe last night." Arthur hesitates. The last thing he expected this morning was to be questioned by the police, and now his mind is racing, trying to understand what's happening. After a beat, he steps aside, letting them in. Once inside, the officers move with a quiet authority, scanning the room as if expecting Zoe to appear from some hidden corner. Arthur feels uneasy under their scrutiny. He gestures toward the chairs, but they don't sit, preferring to remain standing, maintaining their professional distance. "We understand she's been here before," the male officer starts, flipping through a small notebook. "Her foster parents mentioned she's run away several times in the past. We've found her wandering the neighborhood on more than one occasion." Arthur's heart sinks. "I didn't know she was running away," he admits, the realization weighing heavily on him. "She came here, she seemed so happy, just a little girl wanting to celebrate with someone. She didn't say anything about her foster family." The female officer softens slightly. "Zoe's foster parents have reported some difficulties with her," she explains. "They're not the most attentive, from what we've gathered. She tends to seek out company elsewhere, anywhere she feels more comfortable." Arthur processes this slowly, his chest tightening. The thought of Zoe being neglected by the people meant to care for her stirs something protective deep within him. "Why would she need to run away?" he asks, his voice quieter now, more pained. "She's just a child." The officers exchange another look, this one tinged with sympathy. "We understand your concern, sir," the woman says gently. "But Zoe's situation is complicated. She's been moved between several foster homes, and it's clear she's struggling to find a place where she feels secure." Arthur rubs a hand over his face, the weight of their words sinking in. He'd only known Zoe for a few hours, but in that short time, she had brought so much light into his lonely world. Now, knowing the pain she was hiding beneath that bright smile, his heart aches for her. "Did she tell you anything specific about her foster family?" the male officer asks, breaking the silence. Arthur shakes his head. "No. She didn't say much about them, just that she's never really had a proper birthday. I didn't push her for more. She seemed happy to be here, that's all. The officers nod, jotting down notes, and Arthur feels a sense of helplessness creep in. What more could he have done? He hadn't known, hadn't realized the gravity of her situation. And now, with the police standing in his living room, the weight of responsibility presses down on him. After a few more questions, the officers thank Arthur for his cooperation. They make it clear that they'll be looking into Zoe's situation further, but for now, she'll be returned to her foster home once they locate her. Arthur watches them leave, his heart heavy with concern for the little girl who had brought him so much unexpected joy. When the door closes, the house feels emptier than it did before. The warmth that Zoe brought with her the previous night is gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. Arthur stands in the middle of the room, staring at the door, replaying the conversation in his head. Zoe had never once hinted at the troubles in her life. She had only been a bright, bubbly child, eager to make someone else's day better. Now, though, Arthur sees it all differently. She wasn't just a kind little girl looking for company. She was a child searching for safety, for a place where she could feel loved and cared for. The more he thinks about it, the more his heart aches. She deserves so much more than the life she's been given. But what can he do? He's an old man, living alone, with no real way to help her. The rational part of his mind tells him that there's nothing he can do. She's a foster child, with a system designed to take care of her, flawed as it may be. He's not equipped to intervene, not at his age, not with his own limitations. And yet, the image of Zoe's face, her bright smile, the way her eyes lit up when they baked the cake together, won't leave him. He can't shake the feeling that she came to him for a reason. That, somehow, he's meant to help her. Arthur sits back down, staring at the small card she made for him. He's torn between his own limitations and the desire to protect this child who brought light back into his life. His house feels lonelier than ever now, and the thought of Zoe being sent back to a home where she's neglected gnaws at him. Maybe, just maybe, there's something more he can do. In the days following the police visit, Arthur's routine feels emptier than ever. He goes through the motions, but his thoughts are consumed by Zoe. Every time he sits down in the now painfully quiet house, he's haunted by the memory of her laughter, the way she lit up his home. His gaze constantly drifts toward the small card she left behind, and he can't shake the sense of responsibility growing inside him. Her words echo in his mind, the confession that she never had a real birthday, the way she spoke so casually about something no child should experience. Arthur begins to realize just how deep her longing for connection runs. Zoe had shown him, in a matter of hours, what he'd been missing in his own life for years, a sense of purpose, the warmth of companionship. He had been living in the past, dwelling on memories of his wife and the estrangement from his children, but Zoe had shifted something inside him. She had made him feel needed, alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. The thought of her returning to a neglectful home gnaws at him. Determined not to let her slip away into a system that's failed her, Arthur makes a decision. He begins looking into the foster care system, starting with the basics. His hands shake slightly as he opens his laptop, typing in search queries he never thought he'd be considering at his age: how to become a legal guardian, foster care resources for seniors, adopting a foster child. The more he reads, the more complicated it seems. But Arthur doesn't shy away. He knows it won't be easy, but Zoe deserves more than the life she's living. He can't just turn a blind eye. The next day, Arthur heads to a local legal aid center. It's the first time in years he's felt so nervous about something, but the stakes feel impossibly high. He speaks to a social worker there, explaining the situation as best he can. The woman listens carefully, her face softening as she hears about Zoe. But when Arthur mentions his interest in becoming her guardian, her expression shifts to one of concern. "Mr. Reynolds, I have to be honest with you," she says gently. "At your age, it's going to be very difficult to go through the guardianship process. The foster system tends to favor younger families, those who can care for a child long term." Arthur nods, his heart sinking a little, but he holds his ground. "I understand that, he replies. But I can't stand by and let her go back to a home where she's neglected. She's already been through so much. If I don't try, who will? The social worker sighs, her eyes soft with empathy. It's not impossible, she concedes. But you'll need to show that you have a strong support system, that you can meet her needs. It's going to be a challenge, but if you're serious about this, I can help you get started. Arthur thanks her, feeling both overwhelmed and hopeful as he leaves the center. The reality of the situation weighs heavily on him. He's not naive, he knows he's not young anymore. His health isn't perfect. Some days, his joints ache and his energy wanes. He questions whether he's truly capable of taking care of a child full-time, especially one with as much emotional baggage as Zoe. But then he remembers the light in her eyes when they baked the cake, the way she clung to him like a lifeline during what should have been a simple birthday dinner. Arthur knows he can't live with himself if he doesn't try. He wrestles with the fear of failure, the doubt gnawing at him in the quiet moments, but the alternative, doing nothing, feels far worse. Late one evening, after another restless night, Arthur makes up his mind. He needs to see Zoe, to understand how she's feeling about all of this. He gets in touch with her caseworker, a middle-aged man who sounds tired but professional. After explaining his interest in Zoe's well-being, Arthur asks if there's any way he can visit her. The caseworker, initially skeptical, agrees to a supervised visit. Arthur knows this is his chance to not only see how Zoe is doing but also to figure out if he's really cut out for this. If Zoe feels comfortable with him, maybe, just maybe, he can make a difference in her life. When Arthur arrives at the visit, his heart races. Zoe is sitting in a small, sterile room with her caseworker, her face lighting up the moment she sees Arthur. The transformation in her demeanor is immediate. She goes from fidgeting to beaming, jumping up to greet him as if she's been waiting for him all along. "You came!" Zoe exclaims, her eyes wide with joy. Arthur can't help but smile, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. "Of course I came. How have you been, Zoe?" Zoe shrugs, her smile fading a little as she glances toward the caseworker. "I'm okay, I guess. I miss you. It was fun, at your house. I've never had a day like that before." Arthur's heart twists at her words. "I miss you too," he says quietly, then adds, "How would you feel if we spent more time together? Maybe I could see you more often?" Zoe's face lights up again, brighter than before. "Really? You mean it?" Arthur nods, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yeah, I mean it." As they talk more, Arthur realizes that the bond between them has only grown stronger. Zoe feels safe with him, and for the first time in years, Arthur feels like he has a new purpose. He doesn't know what the future holds, but he knows one thing for certain: he won't give up on Zoe. She's already changed his life, and now it's his turn to do the same for her. Arthur's legal battle to become Zoe's guardian begins with a quiet determination, though the odds are stacked against him. At every turn, the system seems to emphasize his age, suggesting he's too old to care for a child, despite his clear dedication. His own children, who live far away, finally respond to his messages. They express concern, not understanding why their father would want to take on such a responsibility at his age. "You're not young anymore, Dad," one of his sons says over the phone. "Why are you doing this?" The distance in their voices stings, but Arthur remains resolute. He can't explain the bond he feels with Zoe, something that seems to fill the hole in his heart left by years of loneliness. With the help of a lawyer from the Legal Aid Center, Arthur navigates the complexities of the foster system. His lawyer, a kind-hearted woman who sees the sincerity in his eyes, tells him upfront that the case will be difficult. The foster system prioritizes younger, more suitable families. "But," she adds, "you've got something those other families might not have. You've got love, and Zoe's got a voice in this too." Arthur holds on to her words, finding strength in the fact that Zoe's feelings matter. As the legal process drags on, Arthur finds himself changing. The lethargy he once felt has faded. His days, once routine and slow, are now filled with purpose. He begins taking better care of himself, eating healthier, going for short walks, even tidying up the house in ways he hasn't since his wife passed. Zoe's visits, though still supervised for now, bring life to his home. She helps him with little things, like rearranging the kitchen or choosing new flowers for the garden. The two of them settle into a rhythm that feels like the beginnings of a family. Arthur notices that he's smiling more, laughing more, and even dreaming about a future, something he hasn't done in a long time. Zoe, for her part, blossoms under Arthur's care. She looks forward to their time together, always showing up with new ideas for how they can spend their afternoons. The bond between them strengthens, and during one of their visits, Zoe says softly, "I wish I could live with you all the time." Arthur doesn't say much in response, but inside, his resolve hardens even more. After months of court hearings, background checks, and home evaluations, the day of the final court hearing arrives. Arthur's nerves are palpable, but his lawyer reassures him, telling him that the caseworker's reports have been positive, and Zoe has made it clear where she wants to be. In the courtroom, the judge listens carefully as both sides present their arguments. Zoe, sitting beside Arthur, holds his hand the entire time, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. When the judge finally speaks, Arthur feels as if the air has been sucked from the room. The decision, however, is clear. "Mr. Reynolds, though there were concerns raised due to your age, it is evident that your relationship with Zoe is one of deep care and mutual love. The court believes that Zoe's best interests are served by allowing her to remain in your care." Arthur can barely register the words as the judge rules in their favor, granting him custody of Zoe. The room feels weightless as Zoe throws her arms around him, tears in her eyes. "We did it!" she whispers, her voice filled with joy. Arthur hugs her tightly, realizing that for the first time in years, his life has purpose again. A year later, the transformation in Arthur's life is undeniable. His house, once quiet and filled with the echo of empty memories, now buzzes with energy and warmth. It's his birthday again, but this time, it's nothing like the lonely dinners of the past. Zoe has taken charge of the day, excitedly planning every detail. There's a larger cake on the table, this one homemade by Zoe, complete with lopsided decorations and too much frosting, but Arthur wouldn't have it any other way. The house is filled with laughter, and for the first time in years, Arthur's friends from the neighborhood come by to celebrate. The warmth of community, something Arthur had forgotten, fills the space. As he watches Zoe running around, adjusting decorations and making sure everything is perfect, Arthur feels an overwhelming sense of peace. His home, once a shrine to the past, has been transformed into a place of love and new memories. Zoe's laughter fills the air, and Arthur can't help but marvel at how much has changed in such a short time. He looks at her and sees the family he never expected but always needed. When Zoe brings him the cake, candles lit and eyes shining, Arthur makes a wish, though, in his heart, he knows he's already been granted everything he could ever want. As they sing, "Happy Birthday," Arthur looks around the room, realizing that this, right here, is the life he was meant to live. Not one of solitude, but of connection, hope, and unconditional love. With Zoe by his side, he no longer feels the weight of his age or the emptiness of the years that passed before her. Together, they've built a new family, unconventional but full of meaning. For both of them, this birthday marks the start of something beautiful, an unspoken promise of all the birthdays and moments yet to come.